Sarah Johnson's fingers trembled as she set the last plate on the dinner table. The aroma of her famous pot roast filled the air, but an unsettling feeling gnawed at her gut. She glanced at the clock, willing her husband David to arrive home soon. The front door creaked open, and Sarah's shoulders relaxed. David's heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. "Honey, I'm home," he called out, his voice weary from a long day at the construction site. Sarah met him at the kitchen entrance, planting a quick kiss on his cheek. "How was work?" David's face darkened. "Same old story. The new foreman's been riding me hard all week. I swear he's got it out for me." Sarah squeezed his arm. "You're the best worker they've got. He'll see that soon enough." Their daughter Maya bounded down the stairs, her braids swinging. "Dad, you're just in time. I've got big news." David's expression softened. "What's up, princess?" Maya beamed. "I got an A on my history project. Ms. Thompson said it was the best in the class." "That's my girl." David scooped her up in a bear hug, his earlier frustration melting away. The family settled around the dinner table, the warmth of their home a stark contrast to the world outside. Sarah bowed her head to say grace, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lord, we thank you for this meal and for keeping our family safe. Amen." As they began to eat, a sharp knock at the door shattered the peace. Sarah's fork clattered to her plate. David frowned. Who could that be at this hour? Before anyone could move, the door burst open with a thunderous crash. Officer Bradley stormed in, his face twisted with rage. "Nobody move," he barked, hand on his holster. David shot to his feet. "What the hell is going on here?" Officer Bradley's eyes darted around the room, settling on each family member with thinly veiled disgust. "We've received reports of stolen goods in this neighborhood. I have reason to believe they're in this house." Sarah's heart raced. She stood slowly, hands raised. "Officer, there must be some mistake. We haven't stolen anything." Bradley sneered. "Sure you haven't. Step aside. I'm searching the premises." David's fists clenched. "You can't just barge in here without a warrant." "I don't need one," Bradley spat. "Probable cause. Now sit down before I make you." Maya whimpered, shrinking behind her mother. Sarah's nurse's instincts kicked in, her voice steady despite her fear. "Officer Bradley, please. Let's talk about this calmly. There are no stolen goods here." Bradley ignored her, shoving past to rifle through their living room. He tossed cushions aside, appended drawers, and knocked over picture frames. Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the officer. "Wait, I know you. Your grandmother. I cared for her at the hospital last year. Don't you remember me?" Bradley paused, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. For a moment, Sarah dared to hope. Then his expression hardened once more. "Doesn't matter," he growled. "You people are all the same." David's jaw clenched, his voice low and dangerous. "What do you mean, you people?" Bradley smirked. "You know exactly what I mean." The air crackled with tension. Sarah placed a restraining hand on David's arm, silently pleading with him to stay calm. Maya slipped away, unnoticed in the chaos. She crept upstairs, her heart pounding. With trembling fingers, she activated the hidden cameras she'd installed after a string of break-ins rocked their neighborhood. Downstairs, Bradley continued his rampage. He yanked open kitchen cabinets, scattering their contents across the floor. "Where are you hiding it?" he demanded. Sarah's patience wore thin. "Hiding what? We've done nothing wrong." Bradley whirled on her, eyes blazing. "Don't lie to me. I know you're kind. Always up to no good." David stepped between them, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "That's enough. Get out of our house. Now." Bradley's hand inched towards his gun. "You threatening me, boy?" The air left Sarah's lungs. She tugged David back, desperate to defuse the situation. "Please, officer. We're law-abiding citizens. There's no need for this." Bradley scoffed. "Law-abiding? That'll be the day. I'm just getting started." He stormed towards a bedroom, shoving David aside. Sarah's breath caught as she noticed a familiar photo on the dresser, her with Bradley's grandmother in the hospital. "Officer," she called out, a last-ditch effort. "Look at that picture. Remember how I helped your grandmother? How she said I was her guardian angel?" Bradley's gaze flickered to the photo. For a heartbeat, Sarah saw a glimmer of doubt in his eyes. Then his face twisted with hatred. "Doesn't change a thing," he snarled. "For all I know, you stole from her too." Sarah recoiled as if slapped. The depth of Bradley's prejudice stunned her into silence. Bradley leaned in close, his voice dripping with malice. "I could plant something right now. How'd you like that? Your perfect little family, torn apart. One night in jail would teach you a lesson." Maya crept back downstairs, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She caught her mother's eye and gave a subtle nod. The cameras were rolling. David's voice shook with rage. "You won't get away with this." Bradley laughed, cold and mirthless. "Who's gonna stop me? Your word against mine. We both know how that ends." Sarah's mind raced. She needed to buy time, to keep Bradley talking until help arrived. She thought of his grandmother, of the nights she'd spent by her bedside, of the genuine connection they'd formed. "Your grandmother would be ashamed," Sarah said softly. "She raised you better than this." Bradley's face contorted with fury. He grabbed Sarah's arm, yanking her close. "Don't you dare speak about my family." David lunged forward, but Bradley was quicker. He shoved Sarah aside and drew his weapon, aiming it squarely at David's chest. "Give me a reason," Bradley hissed. "I've been waiting for this." Time seemed to stand still. Sarah's heart pounded in her ears. She looked at her husband, at her terrified daughter, at the man whose hatred threatened to destroy everything they'd built. In that moment, Sarah made a choice. She wouldn't let fear win. She wouldn't let Bradley's prejudice define them. With steady hands and a voice that didn't waver, she spoke. "Officer Bradley, I understand you're angry. I understand you're scared. But this isn't the answer. We're not your enemy. We're your neighbors, your fellow citizens. The same blood runs through our veins." Bradley's hand trembled, his finger on the trigger. Sarah continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I saved your grandmother's life because it was the right thing to do, not because of her color or mine, because she was a human being in need, just like you are right now." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Bradley's face. For a moment, the hatred in his eyes wavered. Then the sound of sirens pierced the air. Bradley's head snapped towards a window, momentary panic flashing across his features. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from their lawyer, Jonathan Taylor. "On my way. Hold on." As red and blue lights flooded the room, Sarah allowed herself a small breath of relief. The night was far from over, but a glimmer of hope had emerged. Bradley lowered his weapon, his bravado crumbling. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing towards the door. Sarah watched him go, her heart heavy with the weight of what they'd endured. She pulled her family close, their embrace a shield against the world's cruelty. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "We're going to be okay." As the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, Sarah steeled herself for the battle ahead. They had truth on their side, and the hidden cameras had captured all. Bradley's reign of terror was about to end, but the scars of this night would linger long after the physical wounds healed. Sarah knew their fight for justice was just beginning. She looked at her family, battered but unbroken, and found the strength to face whatever came next. The door burst open once more, but this time it was Jonathan Taylor who entered, flanked by uniformed officers. Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief. "Are you all right?" Jonathan asked, his eyes scanning the destroyed living room. Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "We will be." As the new officers began taking statements, Sarah caught Maya's eye. Her daughter gave a small, determined nod. The truth would come out, captured forever on camera. In the chaos of that moment, Sarah allowed herself to hope. Hope that justice would prevail. Hope that their ordeal might spark change. Hope that someday, families like theirs wouldn't have to live in fear. It was a small flame, flickering in the darkness, but it was enough to light the way forward. Officer Bradley's eyes gleamed with malice as he tore through the Johnson family's belongings. The living room, once a haven of warmth, now resembled a war zone. Cushions lay gutted, picture frames shattered on the floor. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched Maya close. "Please, officer, you're frightening my daughter." Bradley sneered. "Should have thought of that before you decided to break the law." David's jaw clenched. "We haven't broken any laws. You're the one." "Shut it." Bradley barked, shoving past David to ransack the kitchen. The sound of shattering china pierced the air. Sarah flinched, remembering her grandmother's cherished tea set. Generations of history, reduced to shards in seconds. Maya whimpered, "Mom, make him stop." Sarah's heart ached. She'd always taught Maya that the police were there to protect them. Now, that illusion lay as broken as the china on the floor. "It's okay, baby," Sarah whispered, though the words fell hollow. "It'll be over soon." Bradley's laughter cut through the air. "Oh, it's far from over. You'll be spending the night in jail. All of you." David's fists clenched. "On what charges?" "I'll think of something." Bradley's grin was feral. "Resisting arrest sounds good, don't you think?" Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. "Stuck in traffic. ETA 20 minutes. Hold on. 20 minutes. It might as well have been an eternity." Bradley stormed upstairs, his heavy footfalls echoing through the house. Sarah exchanged a worried glance with David. Their bedroom was up there, their most private space, about to be violated. "We can't let him do this," David hissed. Sarah gripped his arm. "We don't have a choice. Please, David, don't give him an excuse." A dog's frantic barking pierced the night, then abruptly fell silent. The sudden quiet felt oppressive, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Sarah's skin crawled. She imagined Bradley pawing through her dresser, violating their privacy with every drawer he opened. "Maybe I should," David started. "No," Sarah cut him off. "We stay together." Bradley's voice drifted down the stairs, a sing-song taunt. "Finding all sorts of interesting things up here. You people sure do like your secrets." Maya's eyes widened in panic. "Mom, my diary." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "It doesn't matter, sweetie. We have nothing to hide." But as Bradley's triumphant footsteps descended the stairs, Sarah's certainty wavered. What if he'd planted something? What if? Her thoughts scattered as Bradley reappeared, Maya's pink diary clutched in his meaty fist. Well, he drawled. "What have we here?" Maya lunged forward. "That's private." Bradley's arm shot out, shoving the teenager back. She stumbled, nearly falling. It happened in an instant. David, his face contorted with rage, launched himself at Bradley. "Don't you touch my daughter." The two men collided, grappling for control. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat as she saw Bradley reach for his weapon. "David, no!" she screamed, but it was too late. Bradley's fist connected with David's jaw, sending him sprawling. In a flash, David was on the ground, Bradley's knee pressing into his back as he snapped on the handcuffs. "Resisting arrest," Bradley panted, a sick grin spreading across his face. "Assaulting an officer. Oh, you're in for it now." Sarah's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. She had to do something, had stopped this nightmare before. A glint of metal caught her eye. The family photo on the mantel, the one of her and Bradley's grandmother. Their last chance. "Officer Bradley," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Look at that photo. Really look at it. That's your grandmother. Remember how I cared for her? How I saved her life?" Bradley's gaze flickered to the photo, then back to Sarah. For a moment, something like doubt crossed his face. "That was different," he muttered. Sarah pressed on. "How? How was it different? I didn't see color then, and I don't see it now. All I see is a person who needs help." Bradley's grip on David loosened, just slightly. Sarah's heart soared. Maybe, just maybe, a sharp crack split the air. Sarah whirled to see Maya standing by the bookshelf, eyes wide with horror. At her feet lay the remains of a hidden camera. Bradley's face twisted with fury. "You were recording me." The moment shattered. Bradley yanked David to his feet, shoving him towards the door. "That's it. You're all under arrest. Conspiracy, obstruction of justice." "No," Sarah cried, desperation clawing at her throat. "Please, you can't." Bradley's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Oh, I can, and I will. Your little stunt just made things a whole lot worse." As Bradley forced David out the door, Sarah's mind raced. The cameras. Maya had set up multiple cameras. If they could just stall long enough for Jonathan to arrive, maybe. "Mom," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "What do we do?" Sarah squared her shoulders. They'd been backed into a corner, but she refused to give up. Not when her family's future hung in the balance. "We fight," she said softly, "with truth, with dignity. It's all we have left." Bradley returned, handcuffs at the ready. "Your turn, ladies. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Sarah met his gaze, chin held high. "Officer Bradley, I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about right and wrong." Bradley hesitated, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. For a moment, Sarah dared to hope. Then his radio crackled to life. "Unit 247, what's your status?" Bradley's face hardened. He keyed the radio. "Situation under control. Suspects in custody." Sarah's heart sank. As Bradley reached for her wrists, she closed her eyes, silently praying for a miracle. The sound of screeching tires cut through the night. Sarah's eyes flew open as Jonathan burst through the door, out of breath and wild-eyed. "Stop right there," he shouted. "Sarah, don't say another word. Officer Bradley, you are in violation of multiple constitutional." Bradley's gun was out in a flash, trained on Jonathan. "Back off, counselor. This doesn't concern you." Jonathan stood his ground. "Oh, but it does. You entered this home without a warrant, assaulted my clients, and are now attempting to make unlawful arrests. I suggest you stand down immediately." Bradley's finger tightened on the trigger. "I said back off." The tension in the room was unbearable. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched the standoff unfold. Suddenly, Bradley's radio crackled again. "All units, return to station immediately. Code 6, repeat, Code 6. Bradley's face paled. He keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 247. I'm in the middle of—" "Negative 247. The voice cut him off. "Return to station now. That's an order." Bradley's hand shook as he lowered his weapon. "This isn't over," he snarled. As he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Sarah's knees gave out. She sank to the floor, tears of relief streaming down her face. Jonathan rushed to her side. "Sarah, are you all right? Where's David?" "Outside," she managed, "in Bradley's car." Jonathan nodded grimly. "I'll take care of it. Maya, call an ambulance for your father, just in case." As Jonathan hurried out, Sarah pulled Maya close. "It's over, baby. We're safe." Maya's voice was small. "But Mom, the cameras." Bradley found one. What if? Sarah's eyes widened as realization dawned. The cloud backup. "Maya, did it work?" Maya nodded, a spark of hope igniting in her eyes. "Everything uploaded automatically. We have it all." Sarah let out a shaky breath. "Then it's not over. It's just beginning." As sirens wailed in the distance, Sarah steeled herself for the fight ahead. They had the truth on their side now, and she would make damn sure the world heard it. The next few hours passed in a blur. Paramedics checked David for injuries, finding only bruises and a sprained wrist. Police officers, not Bradley, took their statements, their faces grim as they viewed the footage from Maya's cameras. As dawn broke, Sarah sat on their battered couch, surrounded by the wreckage of their home. David's arm was draped protectively around Maya, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion. Jonathan paced the room, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, Chief Harris. I understand. We'll be there at 9 a.m. sharp." He hung up, turning to Sarah with a weary smile. "It's happening. Internal Affairs is opening an investigation into Bradley. Your testimony, combined with the video evidence. Sarah, this could change everything." Sarah nodded, too drained to feel triumphant. "What about David's arrest?" "Charges dropped," Jonathan assured her. "Bradley had no grounds. They're scrambling to cover their asses now that the truth is out." David stirred. "So what happens next?" Jonathan's eyes gleamed. "We fight. We make sure Bradley never wears a badge again. And we use this case to shine a light on the systemic issues that allowed it to happen in the first place." Sarah's gaze drifted to the shattered photo frame on the floor. Bradley's grandmother smiled up at her, a reminder of the kindness that had set this whole nightmare in motion. "It shouldn't have to be this way," she murmured. "One act of compassion shouldn't be the exception. It should be the rule." David squeezed her hand. "Then we'll make it the rule, starting now." As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. They had a long road ahead, but they would walk it together. And maybe, just maybe, their story would be the catalyst for real change. Maya stirred, blinking sleepily. "Mom, is it really over?" Sarah brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "No, sweetie, it's just beginning, but this time we're ready." As they sat there, battered but unbroken, Sarah knew that whatever came next, they would face it as a family. United by love, strengthened by adversity, and committed to fighting for a world where kindness wasn't the exception, but the expectation. The battle for justice had only just begun. Officer Bradley's face contorted with rage as he paced the Johnsons' living room, his eyes darting between the family and the shattered remains of the hidden camera. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he snarled, kicking aside the broken pieces. "Trying to set me up?" Sarah stood tall, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. "We're not setting anyone up, officer. We're protecting ourselves." Bradley's laugh was cold, mirthless. "Protecting yourselves? From what? The law." "From injustice," David interjected, his jaw clenched. "From people who abuse their power." Bradley's hand twitched towards his holster. "Watch your mouth, boy. You're already in deep shit. Don't make it worse." The air crackled with tension. Maya huddled behind her parents, her eyes wide with terror. Sarah's mind raced. They needed stall to keep Bradley talking until Jonathan arrived. But how? A memory flashed through her mind. Bradley's grandmother, frail and scared in her hospital bed. The way her eyes had lit up when Sarah held her hand, offering comfort in her darkest hour. "Officer Bradley," Sarah began, her voice soft but firm. "Do you remember what your grandmother said to me that night in the hospital?" Bradley's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "She said, 'Sarah, you're an angel. God sent you to me.'" Sarah's eyes never left Bradley's face. "She told me how proud she was of her grandson, following in his father's footsteps. How she prayed every night that you'd be a force for good in this world." For a moment, something flickered in Bradley's eyes. Doubt, shame, maybe even a glimmer of the boy he once was. But then his face hardened once more. "Shut up," he growled. "You don't know anything about my family." "I know your grandmother would be heartbroken to see you like this," Sarah pressed on. "To see you betraying everything she believed in, everything she taught you." Bradley's hand trembled as he reached for his cuffs. "That's it. You're all under arrest. Conspiracy, obstruction of justice." The front door burst open. Jonathan Taylor strode in, his face a mask of determined fury. "Step away from my clients, Officer Bradley," he demanded. "You have no legal right to be here." Bradley whirled on Jonathan. "Back off, counselor. This doesn't concern you." "But it does," Jonathan countered, his voice ice cold. Illegal entry, destruction of property, assault. Shall I go on? You're looking at a career-ending lawsuit, Bradley. Walk away now, while you still can. Bradley's face flushed crimson. You threatening me, lawyer? No. Jonathan replied calmly. I'm giving you one last chance to do the right thing. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Bradley lunged at Jonathan, his fist connecting with the lawyer's jaw. Chaos erupted. David leapt forward, tackling Bradley to the ground. Sarah screamed for them to stop, while Maya fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911. In the midst of the melee, a sharp crack echoed through the room. Everyone froze, turning to see Bradley's gun on the floor, having discharged during the struggle. Sarah's heart stopped as she saw the growing red stain on Jonathan's shirt. "Oh God," she whispered, rushing to his side. "Jonathan." As Sarah pressed her hands to the wound, trying desperately to stem the bleeding, Bradley stumbled back, his face ashen. I didn't mean to," he stammered. David's voice was low, dangerous. "Get out, now." Bradley hesitated, his eyes darting between the injured lawyer and the door. "I said get out." David roared. As Bradley fled, Sarah turned to Maya. "Sweetie, I need you to be brave. Go to my medical bag in the kitchen. Hurry." Maya nodded, tears streaming down her face as she raced to retrieve the supplies. Sarah worked feverishly, her nurse's training kicking in as she assessed Jonathan's wound. "Stay with me, Jonathan. Help is on the way." Jonathan's eyes fluttered open, his voice weak. "The cameras, did they?" "Shoo," Sarah soothed. "Don't try to talk. Everything's going to be okay." As sirens wailed in the distance, a new voice cut through the chaos. "What in God's name is going on here?" Sarah looked up to see an older woman standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock. It took a moment for recognition to dawn. "Mrs. Bradley." Sarah gasped. Bradley's grandmother surveyed the scene, her gaze settling on Jonathan's prone form. "Sarah, is that you? What happened?" Before Sarah could respond, the room filled with police officers and paramedics. As Jonathan was rushed to the ambulance, Sarah found herself recounting the night's events to a stone-faced detective. "And you're certain it was Officer Bradley who fired the shot?" the detective asked. Sarah nodded, her voice hoarse. "Yes, it was an accident, but he was the one holding the gun." Mrs. Bradley stepped forward, her face etched with grief. "I can't believe it. My grandson. How could he?" The detective's radio crackled to life. "All units, be advised. Suspect Bradley has barricaded himself in his vehicle at the corner of 5th and Main. Negotiators en route." Sarah's heart sank. This nightmare was far from over. As the hours ticked by, the Johnsons' living room became a command center. Chief Harris arrived, his face grim as he coordinated the standoff with Bradley. Sarah sat with Mrs. Bradley, holding the older woman's hand as they waited for news. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Bradley whispered. "I never thought. I always believed he was a good boy." Sarah squeezed her hand. "We all have the capacity for good and evil. It's the choices we make that define us." Mrs. Bradley's eyes filled with tears. "He was so angry after his father died. I thought the police academy would give him purpose, structure. Instead, it gave him power," Sarah finished softly. "And power without compassion is a dangerous thing." A commotion at the door drew their attention. Maya burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, Dad, you need to see this." She thrust her phone forward, showing a live news broadcast. Bradley's standoff was being streamed online, and comments were pouring in from viewers around the world. "People are sharing our story," Maya explained breathlessly. "The footage from the hidden cameras. It's gone viral. Everyone's talking about it." Sarah watched in awe as messages of support flooded the screen. People from all walks of life, united in their outrage at Bradley's actions and their admiration for the Johnson family's courage. Chief Harris approached, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Johnson, a word." Sarah followed him to a quiet corner, her heart pounding. "We've got a situation," Harris began. "Bradley's demanding to speak with you. Says he'll only come out if you're there." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Me? But why?" Harris shook his head. "I don't know, but I can't in good conscience ask you to put yourself in danger. If you don't want to do this—" "I'll do it," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with her own resolve. "If there's a chance to end this peacefully, I have to try." As Sarah prepared to face Bradley one last time, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was tired, scared, but determined. She thought of Jonathan, fighting for his life in the hospital, of Maya, whose quick thinking had exposed Bradley's actions to the world, of David, whose unwavering support had been her anchor through this storm. And she thought of Bradley's grandmother, whose love and faith had shaped a young boy into a man capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. In this moment, she wasn't just fighting for her family or for justice. She was fighting for the very soul of her community, for the hope that compassion could triumph over hatred, that understanding could bridge the chasms of prejudice and fear. As she stepped out into the night, flanked by Chief Harris and a team of officers, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Whatever happened next, she knew that her actions, her choice to face this challenge head-on, would ripple out into the world, touching lives far beyond her own. The standoff with Bradley awaited, a final confrontation that would test everything Sarah believed in. But as she walked towards the flashing lights and barricades, Sarah held onto one unshakable truth, that even in the darkest moments, a single act of courage could light the way forward. And in that light, there was hope for healing, for justice, and for a future where the color of one's skin no longer determined the content of one's character. Sarah Johnson, nurse and mother, took another step forward. The world watched and waited to see what would unfold. Sarah Johnson stood at the edge of the police barricade, her heart pounding. Officer Bradley's patrol car sat 100 yards away, its occupant hidden behind tinted windows. The night air crackled with tension. Chief Harris approached, his face grim. "Mrs. Johnson, are you sure about this?" Sarah nodded, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have to try." As she stepped forward, a hand caught her arm. She turned to see David, his eyes brimming with fear and love. "Be careful," he whispered. Sarah squeezed his hand. "I will." She walked towards Bradley's car, each step deliberate. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Officer Bradley," she called out, her voice carrying across the empty street. "It's Sarah Johnson. I'm here to talk." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the driver's side window lowered. Bradley's face appeared, haggard and haunted. "Why are you here?" he spat. "Come to Globe." Sarah shook her head. "No, I'm here because I believe there's still good in you." Bradley laughed bitterly. "Good. After what I've done." "You made terrible choices," Sarah acknowledged. "But it's not too late to make the right one now." She took another step closer. "Your grandmother always believed in you, Bradley. She saw the best in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself." Bradley's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Don't talk about her." "Why not?" Sarah pressed. "She loved you. She was proud of you. What would she say if she could see you now?" Bradley's facade cracked. "She'd be ashamed," he whispered. Sarah nodded. "Maybe. But she'd also want you to make things right." For a moment, the only sound was the distant wail of sirens. Then Bradley's shoulders slumped. "How?" he asked, his voice small and broken. "By facing the consequences of your actions," Sarah said gently. "By admitting your mistakes and working to be better." Bradley met her gaze, his eyes searching hers. "Why are you doing this? After everything I did to you and your family." Sarah's voice was firm. "Because hate doesn't drive out hate. Only love can do that." Slowly, Bradley's hand moved away from his holster. He reached for the door handle. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay." As Bradley stepped out of the car, hands raised, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd. Chief Harris rushed forward, cuffs at the ready. Sarah watched as Bradley was led away, a mix of emotions swirling in her chest. It wasn't a victory, not really, but it was a step towards healing. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The Johnson family found themselves at the center of a media storm, their stories sparking nationwide conversations about racial profiling and police accountability. Jonathan Taylor, recovered from his injuries, threw himself into their case with renewed vigor. The lawsuit against the police department gained momentum, bolstered by the viral video and Bradley's confession. One morning, as Sarah scrolled through her phone, a headline caught her eye. Officer Bradley pleads guilty, agrees to testify against corrupt colleagues. She showed it to David, who let out a low whistle. Never thought I'd see the day. Maya bounded into the kitchen, her face alight with excitement. Mom, Dad, you've got to see this. She pulled up a video on her tablet. It showed a group of young people, diverse in race and background, standing outside the police station. "We demand change," they chanted. "No more racial profiling. No more abuse of power." Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized faces from their neighborhood, standing shoulder to shoulder with people from all walks of life. "It's happening all over the country," Maya explained. "People are using our story to push for real reforms." David wrapped an arm around his daughter. "Look at that. My little girl, starting a revolution." Maya blushed. "I just did what was right." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Sometimes that's all it takes. Months later, Sarah stood before a packed courtroom, her voice steady as she delivered her victim impact statement. "What happened to my family was not just an isolated incident," she said. "It was a symptom of a deeper sickness in our society. A sickness that tells us to fear those who look different, to suspect the innocent, to abuse power instead of using it to protect." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "But I stand here today not just as a victim, but as a beacon of hope. Because in the darkest moment of our lives, we chose love over hate. We chose justice over vengeance. And in doing so, we sparked a movement that is changing lives across this nation." As she stepped down from a witness stand, Sarah caught sight of a familiar face in the back of the courtroom. Bradley's grandmother sat there, her eyes brimming with tears. After the hearing, the elderly woman approached Sarah. "I don't have words to express how sorry I am," she said, her voice trembling. Sarah took her hands. "You have nothing to apologize for. Your grandson made his own choices." "But if I had known, if I had seen the hatred growing in him." Sarah shook her head. "We can't change the past, but we can work to build a better future." The old woman nodded, a spark of determination in her eyes. "Yes, yes, we can." On a crisp autumn morning, Sarah stood before a crowd gathered in the park near their home. A ribbon stretched across a new community center, its walls adorned with murals celebrating diversity and unity. "Today, we open more than just a building," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the hushed audience. "We open our hearts to a new way of living together, a way that recognizes our shared humanity, that celebrates our differences instead of fearing them." She gestured to the people around her, community leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens who had come together to make this day possible. This center stands as a testament to what we can achieve when we choose love over hate, understanding over ignorance. It's a place where our children can learn, where our elders can share their wisdom, where strangers can become friends. Sarah's eyes found her family in the crowd. David stood tall, his arm around Maya's shoulders. Their faces shone with pride and love. "The road ahead won't be easy," Sarah continued. "Change never is. But if we stay true to our values, if we keep pushing for justice and equality, there's no limit to what we can accomplish." As she cut the ribbon, cheers erupted from the crowd. Sarah felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see Chief Harris. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you. Your courage, it's changing things. We're implementing new training programs, new accountability measures. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "It's a start," she agreed. As the celebration continued around them, Sarah found a quiet moment with her family. "Mom," Maya said, her eyes shining. "I'm so proud of you." David nodded, pulling them both into a hug. "We all are." Sarah looked at her loved ones, then at the diverse, joyful crowd around them. She thought of Bradley, working to make amends from behind bars, of his grandmother, now a vocal advocate for police reform, of Jonathan, using his legal skills to fight for justice in communities across the country. "You know," she said softly, "I think your kindness really did come full circle." David chuckled. "Looks like it." As they joined the festivities, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. Their ordeal had been painful, but it had sparked a movement far greater than themselves. A movement of hope, of change, of love triumphing over hate. And in that moment, surrounded by the community she had helped to heal and unite, Sarah Johnson knew that their story was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning.